Okay, colleagues, greetings and welcome back. So in this section, I will continue our discussion of Thucydides. So this is section 2, segment number 2. In the first segment of the first lecture, I have described what I think is the general context for talking about Thucydides within our course, Introduction to International Political Theory. And this general context I take to be what I mentioned is the long scientific revolution from Thales to Foucault. And the most important motif of this long scientific revolution, I would say the most important idea, is this transition from the teleological to the mechanistic worldview, which implies moving away from notions of freedom, moving away from notions of, immortal soul, moving away from notions of goodness, which can be defined in objective ways, and therefore moving, let's say, from agency, explaining phenomena in terms of agents, towards structure. So we try to offer structural, mechanistic accounts of all phenomena, all natural phenomena, including social phenomena, including phenomena in the international arena, right? And in some sense, this, because the premise of the scientific worldview is this, in the words of Immanuel Kant, der Schlund des zwecklosen Chaos der Materie, the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. So because this is our premise, then in some sense, kind of our basic ontology, our basic ontological view of the nature of social reality would be somewhat conflictual, to some extent conflictual. We see society as artificial. Human beings are not naturally cooperative. We need mechanisms, particular mechanisms that will ensure cooperation, that will force people who are not naturally cooperative to cooperate. Notice, I don't say human beings are evil by nature. I don't think that Thucydides or Machiavelli or Hobbes believes that human beings are evil. In some sense, within the mechanistic picture, nothing is evil in and of itself. There is no place for the notion of evil or for the notion of sin, right? But so bracketing out these moral, judgmental terms, so not talking morally or judgmentally, but talking descriptively, we say human beings are not naturally cooperative. But also because human beings are malleable, Rousseau will talk about perfectibility, or some people prefer to translate this as unfinishedness of human nature. Human beings are underdetermined by instinct. Because human behavior is underdetermined, it is possible through habituation, through culture, through cultural institutions, if you want, it is possible to reshape human behavior in such a way so as to ensure that human beings can cooperate. And I finished the last segment by talking in this phrase from Antonio Gramsci, pessimismo dell'intelligenza, ottimismo della volontà. Pessimism of the intellect, in the realist, starting from the pessimism of the intellect of the realist tradition, from Thucydides, Machiavelli, and Hobbes, our end point, our end goal, our task in this course is to move towards the optimistic, so from this conflictual pessimistic side, to move over to the optimistic consensual side of philosophers such as Hegel, Mill, Marx, and Nietzsche. But, I want to say that ultimately, I think it's not impossible to view Marx as a continuation of the realist tradition, to see Marx as a kind of a realist as well. Although, obviously, once we do that, the definition of the word realism starts to dissolve, basically. It becomes way too broad. But what I'm driving at is that I feel that it's possible within a single intellectual tradition to go from the premises of somebody like Thucydides to somebody like Marx. Okay, enough of that, enough of all of that. Let me talk about our hero, Thucydides, and let me try to be as concise and as structured as possible. I'll try my best. I suppose, a good place to start is to say that Thucydides is a very interesting thinker. He's relevant in all sorts of ways. You have readings that will fill you in on the details of his biography. One thing I wanted to stress is that Thucydides to this day is widely read in many different circles, including especially in military academies throughout the world. I mean, his account of the Peloponnesian War, in some sense, the first work of historiography. Thucydides is maybe one of the first social scientists, one of the first properly academic historians, right? One of the first thinkers or scholars who tries to explain human nature in these, broadly speaking, mechanistic terms, right? And especially, with the focus on this conflict, which is the Peloponnesian War. And again, widely read to this day in classes on political philosophy, classes international theory, and also, military academies. And, I would imagine that the insights of his book, in a very real way, influence the way real politicians who sit in cabinets and make decisions operate to this day. I guess something I forgot to mention, but let me stress this very importantly. I do feel that I am kind of switching back and forth between talking about political philosophy, so to speak, domestic politics, and international theory. So presumably, domestic politics and international politics. And I do think that in an important sense, these are intertwined. And in fact, among other things, this is the insight of many philosophers, including Marx. Well, starting, Thucydides would say this. So Thucydides and let's say Machiavelli and definitely Rousseau, and ultimately, Marx and others, but especially Marx, would say that it is inappropriate to talk about domestic politics without talking about the international arena. It's like I feel that there's a certain primacy of talking about society vis-a-vis the individual. Society is ontologically prior to the individual. Society creates individuals, right? And then there's a certain international dynamic which shapes societies, right? So I think if we want to understand, if we want to have, philosophy of human nature, philosophy of what it means to be human, philosophy of who are you and who am I, we have to it's like there's individual, we have to see this greater perspective. There's the individual, which is constituted by society, and then society exists in the international context. And all of these have to be kept in mind. And there's obviously feedback, because in turn, individuals shape society and society shape international arena. But in terms of ontological primacy, I feel that the arrows point this way, mostly. But, it's a contentious point. I don't necessarily want to get stuck on it. Okay, so I'm not sure if this is too important, but let me mention it nonetheless. So very often when people talk about Thucydides, there's a contrast to be drawn between Thucydides and Homer, and Thucydides and Herodotus. So without going into great detail about this, I suppose the main idea is his sort of methodological atheism. What were the religious beliefs of Thucydides? I don't know, and I don't care. What is important is that in his analysis of the war, he will always try to, he will never appeal. He will never appeal to divine causation. He can mention omens and auguries, right? So he can mention, individual religious beliefs of societies or individuals. He can mention them, right? They do play a role in politics. But you can know that religion exists and that religion plays a fact without actually believing in the truth of religion. And I should actually mention that there's this very interesting thing, called the Sophistic movement and the Ionian Enlightenment, which forms a very important intellectual background to somebody like Thucydides. Ionian Enlightenment and Sophistic movement. And these are in many ways like the first, the foundations of the science of man, in the Western tradition. And I do have both some videos about this and some materials I can recommend, but this is strictly further reading. I don't want to get stuck on this. Although, should I mention this from the very beginning? Yeah, so I suppose from the very beginning, religion is a very contentious issue. So there's a famous or infamous, well, I don't want to say famous, but there's this particular figure among the ancient sophists, Critias, who sort of, anticipating Feuerbach later, Critias is going to say, it's not gods who make men, it's not gods make men, but it is men who invent religious myths. Men invent religion, men invent gods, basically for reasons of social control, for the purpose of social control. That the goal of religion is, is to indoctrinate individuals into pro-social behavior. Well, I mean, indoctrinate is a very strong term with negative connotations, but like ensure social behavior. You can be an atheist and still believe in value of religion. That's one possible way, for example, to read Machiavelli. So methodological atheism doesn't mean that you actually want your whole society to become atheistic. You can be methodologically an atheist and still think that religion, even though not strictly speaking true, is socially useful, right? Or like, you know, like Feuerbach or like Marx, you could say that religion is not strictly true, but also socially deleterious. Although I think Marx would probably agree that in earlier stages of human development, religion played a necessary role. But that's a complicated, you know, complicated story. Neither here nor there. So, yes. So there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, I'm trying to think. Should I? Okay, yeah. So let me also mention one other thing. So we are going to be talking about many different philosophers, and starting with Thucydides, right? So a word of methodological caution. I feel that the best way to treat these competing insights, these competing models of human behavior, as different perspectives. So so these would be complementary models. Complementary models. Max Weber has this wonderful phrase when he talks about ideal types. He calls them einseitige Steigerung, one-sided accentuation. So basically, again, if you think of some simple geometric figure, like a cylinder, for example, a cylinder is both a square and a circle, right? A cylinder, a three-dimensional shape, is both a square, if you look at it from the side, and a circle, if you look at it from the top, right? And so this is, you don't have to agree with this at the end of the day, but this is the basic methodological insight that we have as we are beginning our course, that all these various thinkers will offer potentially complementary insights, different ways of looking at the same reality, different sets of glasses. And by combining these different sets of glasses, you get a fuller picture, a fuller understanding of reality. And on this picture, I don't want to talk about Popper, who's widely considered to be wrong in philosophy of science today. So again, so somebody like Kuhn against Popper. If you don't know these names, don't worry too much. It doesn't matter. It's just a methodological pedantry on my part. The idea is that perspectives are never, you know, true, you know, are never proven true and never falsified. Like this, with a capital T, are never capital T true or capital F false. But perspectives are more or less illuminating. Sort of more or less illuminating, or maybe useful, or maybe sometimes useless or deleterious or obscuring, right? So a good theory is like a map. A map always accentuates certain features of the environment, of the territory, right? And de-emphasizes or hides some other features, right? A perfect map of a territory would be the territory itself, right? That's the only way you can have a map which has a one-to-one correspondence with reality, right? It would have to be as big as reality, right? So perspectives necessarily, you know, focus on certain things and de-emphasize other things. In this way, again, einseitige Steigerung, one-sided accentuation of reality. And these perspectives can be more illuminating or less illuminating. And I feel this is a good way to proceed, you know, as we move down the line. So for example, Hobbes, when Hobbes is going to talk about war of all against all, we should imagine this as an ideal type, because it's kind of an idealized model, like a spherical cow in a vacuum. Because I think, strictly speaking, the kind of war of all against all that Hobbes talks about, you can never see in reality, because there's always, even in the most extreme cases, there's at least some shred of cooperation, right, remaining in human beings, right? So Hobbesian picture can never be completely true, maybe true as an approximation in some particular cases. So in this sense, again, it's neither true nor false, neither completely true nor completely false, but maybe more or less illuminating, more or less useful. Okay. So, yes. Yes, I'm trying to get to Thucydides. I'm looking at my notes. So I have, to some extent, this lecture is a bit of a work in progress for me. So we have in general, like the general historical context of what Thucydides is writing about is we have the Persian Wars as the background, and then we have the Peloponnesian War. And then sort of looming over the horizon is going to be the Macedonian conquest. And the Peloponnesian War is sort of, it's going to be the focus, but I feel to fully appreciate the Peloponnesian War, we have to see it in the context of these two other conflicts that precede and follow after it. Now, how much I want to talk about this, I'm not sure, and this is not a course in history, but I guess I just want to alert your attention to this fact. I mean, when we talk about this, the Persian War represents the triumph of the unity of the Greeks, of the Greek city-states, triumph of unity of city-states, that against all odds, when Greece stands united, Greece conquers. And then the Peloponnesian War is the horrible war, the triumph of disunity, the breakdown of unity, right? Disunity, It's not exactly civil war because Greece, Hellas, right, is more of a cultural construct back in the day. These are, the political units are really city-states, right? So, but still, Hellas at war with itself. Hellas at war with itself, which is not exactly a civil war, but still. And then what happens is that ultimately there are no winners to the Peloponnesian War. The only real winners to the Peloponnesian War is the Macedons. Philip of Macedon, who comes from the outside and conquers Greece. And again, from the standpoint of ancient Greeks, the Macedonians are barbarians, basically. Yes. So yeah, I suppose let me then proceed to talk about the following things. So Thucydides, even though so this is important. Thucydides is writing about he wants to write a book for all times, right? So presumably Thucydides wants to say that there are constants of human nature, and also constants of international relation dynamics, and so that this is something that we should be on the lookout for, right? So as we have been talking about in the seminar, and potentially in the course of this lecture, I will maybe refer to different names, different places. And the ancient Greek context is kind of complicated, so I feel it's very important to not miss the forest for the trees, to not miss the forest for the woods, right? And to see the broader picture, to see the general takeaway points, to see the general insights, and to imagine that the war between Athens and Sparta is just an example of what Thucydides thinks is a general tendency which is operant in human affairs. In all times and all places. So I suppose let me talk about several insights from Thucydides. Let me try at least. So the first one is this cynical and complex view of human nature. Cynical and complex view of human nature. So human beings are driven by passion. Again, as David Hume later is going to say, reason is and ought to be the slave of the passion. Right? So there is reason, but there's also fear. There's also, all sorts of desires, carnal desires, There's also greed. There's ego and hubris, right? This desire to be honored, to be glorified, and these inform individual behavior. So like human individuals are not naturally cooperative. We are less than, let's say, not naturally cooperative, and in fact, human beings are, fickle. Human nature is fickle, unreliable, changing, driven by appetites, torn by these appetites, which drive human nature, human behavior in different ways. And in some sense, the social order is fragile and artificial in a very important sense. Not natural, but artificial. And it is constructed on top of so order constructed on top of chaos and anarchy, like in the bad sense of the word, chaotic, violent, conflictual anarchy. And Thucydides will give also many examples, especially when he talks about the plague within the city walls, when he talks about stasis, which is the Greek term, which appears in your readings, so you probably should know it. Stasis, which means civil war. And in times of the plague or the civil war within the city-states, right? And it's important, please don't call Peloponnesian War civil war, okay? That's not appropriate. Because, again, the political unit is the city-state. So Athens and Sparta are not exactly nation-states in our modern understanding, but certainly Greece is also not a nation-state in anything like our modern understanding. So it's more like the state, the nation of Athenians fights against the nation of Spartans. Not exactly, but that's an approximation. So this is kind of point number one about the cynical and complex view of human nature. So in addition to this cynical view of human nature, the second thing that we have is the notion of fortuna or chance. Now, I purposefully use the word which is not due to Thucydides, but due to Machiavelli, because I want us to be accustomed to this word. So fortuna or chance, right? So, when a politician makes some kind of decisions, or like when Thucydides is, walking us through the steps of the Peloponnesian War, when he talks about how the Peloponnesian War unfolds, right? He shows how one state cannot necessarily trust or rely on the cooperation of another state, because human nature is complex and less than cooperative. So a statesman can promise something to another statesman, but then not keep their promise. So there's propensity to conflict within the states and between the states. So both domestic politics and international politics for Thucydides is broadly speaking conflictual, right? Because of inconstancy and, again, less than perfectly cooperative nature of human psychology and of human societies. But also, in addition to this, the second conflictual factor which makes things even worse is that there's a role of chance events which cannot be controlled by humans, right? And one example could be the plague which hits Athens, right? Even though Thucydides basically will say that, I think he favors some kind of natural explanation that basically, when you have so many people crowded behind city walls, this is a conscious policy on part of Pericles, right? Because the Spartans excel in land military combat, he presumes that they are stronger than Athenians, although there's actually some question about that. I mean, we have this, and I'll talk about this later down the line, about this ideal of Sparta as the land-based power and ideal of Athens as a maritime power. But Athenians also had hoplites, and Athenians also could fight, and Athenians also have brilliant victories on land, like Marathon. So, counterfactual historians imagine that maybe if you had a different leader, or maybe Pericles could have decided to gamble and actually fight the Spartans on land, and Athenians could have won, because the Athenian hoplite phalanx was also quite strong, right? On land. But still, definitely, there's role of chance. There's role of chance in battle. When we get to Clausewitz will definitely going to talk about this. Well, or Machiavelli is going to talk about this. There's chance in battle, but there's also chance like in the affairs in general. And again, Pericles, so I was talking about how Pericles had this strategy of hiding behind the city walls, and once you pack so many people behind walls, Thucydides does not think it's divine wrath or divine punishment. Kind of this is not his approach. He says, he imagines that there must be some kind of natural cause, maybe some kind of primitive humoral theory of disease, which is broadly speaking not entirely wrong. So this kind of the basic idea of contagion, that diseases are contagious, I think was available to the ancients. And so yeah, there's some role of chance, and it's never possible to control affairs completely. Again, I'm reminded of, we're going to talk about Machiavelli probably next week, and Machiavelli will talk about how in the best case scenario, your virtù, your excellence, can account for 50% of your success, but the other 50% will always be due to chance. So, plague would be one example. Sicilian expedition would be another example. So, Sicily, right? The invasion of Sicily, which, Sicilian campaign could have ended in success. Who knows, right? That's a possibility. That's a distinct possibility. Okay, so the third point. Oops. Okay. I'm trying to make sure that, okay, PowerPoint, please help me out. So the third point is basically, again, so you have anarchy, possibility of civil war within the state, and anarchy in the international arena, right? Anarchy in the IR. And very importantly, Thucydides is going to talk about fear and glory seeking. And these two kind of go hand in hand. States and individual, individual states, states and statesmen, individual statesmen will act out of fear because they're trying to protect themselves, but also there's this propensity towards, seeking glory, seeking immortal glory. And this combination of being afraid, fighting for security, and also being on the lookout, being afraid that other states might have to pursue their interests farther than their security requires, right? This introduces like a deeply conflictual element in the international arena. Now Hobbes is going to talk about this much more. So this idea can be expressed in the following way. Well, basically, this is offensive realism. Offensive realism, right? That in some sense, all wars are defensive wars. Like we are afraid, we are trying to secure ourselves, and we know that some of our enemies might be glory-seeking, and therefore, because they seek glory, they will pursue, they will attack, they will be more conflictual than usual, than normal. They will be more aggressive than is required strictly for their safety, but they will, cross the boundaries. And so, in some sense, preemptively, as much as we can, we have to always try to increase our power. That you have, again, this something like a zero-sum conflictual game. Is it possible to counteract these tendencies? Is a big question, and which will be returning to, because again, it's very important. Thucydides describes the human affairs in these terms, but he doesn't prescribe. He doesn't say it's therefore good. In fact, my own interpretation is probably Thucydides saw the great calamity of the Peloponnesian War, the self-destruction in some sense of the Greek culture, right? And Thucydides, I think, was deeply shocked by it, and he wrote his book, I think, to some extent as caution. And even though Thucydides does not really offer any particular practical guidelines, he doesn't say how do we get out of this anarchy. But at least I think there's an aspiration or a hope that his book maybe will help states organize certain international mechanisms, or at least will help statesmen to make better decisions. So maybe the Greeks could have organized some kind of a league to resolve the disputes peacefully. Or maybe statesmen like Pericles, or the Spartan king Archidamus, right? Maybe these statesmen could have pursued more cautious policies to avoid the disaster. Although you have to remember, human beings are glory-seeking. So often politicians will seek glory and will do the irrational, rash thing. But even if politicians are not glory-seeking, even if they're calm and calculated and reasonable, they cannot count on their opponents being rational. So even if Pericles, let's say, wanted peace, nevertheless, he might have been pushed to go to war because he was afraid that, if you pursue peace, you show the sign of weakness, and this dangerous display of weakness leaves you vulnerable. So maybe, this is the problem. You when you show reasonableness, but other people don't think of you as reasonable, they think of you as weak, as somebody to be exploited, and thereby try to take advantage of you, and so you kind of lessen the diminish your security. There's this phrase that gets thrown around, Thucydides trap, right? And there are actually many different ways to imagine what Thucydides trap is. This is what I'm talking about right now, that Pericles and Archidamus might have both wanted to avoid the war, but both were pushed to engage in the war, basically because to negotiate is to show weakness and, again, to potentially open yourself to be attacked by opponents abroad, but also, very importantly, by opponents at home. Because even though both Athens and Sparta, so not both, but Athens and Sparta, each have their very different constitutions, as far as we can tell. So Sparta is this aristocratic oligarchy, and Athens is this populist democracy, something like that. Still, Archidamus cannot just infinitely push for peace, because the Spartan culture, the Spartan assembly, the Spartan aristocratic council of ephors, he doesn't want to seem like a coward to them. So you don't want to seem like a coward towards your allies abroad, but you also do not want to seem like a coward to your, to your constituents, if you want, at home, to your fellow citizens at home. And likewise, Pericles, of course, was in a much, I don't want to say, he was in a different position, but in an equally precarious position, because Pericles actually didn't have any formal title to rule. He was just one of the 10 strategoi in Athens, so he was an elected general, one of the 10 elected generals, and he had to be re-elected over and over, and basically year in and year out. And for approximately 17 years or so, he was being re-elected, with maybe one exception, year after year after year after year, right? And his term of office, the term of office of Pericles, actually constituted 1 year. You get elected as a general for 1 year. And in fact, this doesn't really give you much power, because any kind of decision you make, you have to then go to the assembly and make the assembly vote your way. So even if Pericles is is a calm and level-headed politician, sometimes he might know that he would not be able to persuade the assembly. So he has to use rhetoric. He has to maybe compromise his ideals. So that's definitely a big problem, right? And this kind of brings me, I guess, to my next point, which is this primacy of structure versus agency. So structure versus agency. This is actually what I've been trying to explain right now, right? How Pericles is an agent, Archidamus is an agent, but there's this dynamic, there's this, so negotiation will show like a sign of weakness, and therefore like open to be exploited by your allies abroad, and your, I'm not sure how to best phrase this, factions. I don't want to use the term constituency because that's anachronistic. So allies abroad and competitors at home, right? Rivals at home. So allies abroad and rivals at home. And you might not necessarily want to seem weak to them. So structure and agency. So both in terms of domestic affairs and international affairs. How, again, states and statesmen can be pushed to war for these, again, structural reasons, domestic and international structural reasons, right? So the next point is that basically morality. And so let me maybe stress this. This is, I think, in Thucydides, this is strictly descriptive, not normative. So descriptive, not normative. So this is how Thucydides describes human affairs. He doesn't necessarily say it's good or that's the way it should be. In fact, I think I don't, obviously not everybody reads the book this way, but I think for me the natural way to read this history of the Peloponnesian War as a warning, right? That again, pessimism of the intellect shows you that these are the problems, and then it is your task, or it is our task, to try to solve it somehow, right? So morality basically is trumped by self-interest, self-help, right? And ultimately, the idea is that might makes right. Might makes right. And immediately, because I want to keep a broader perspective on things, remember how Marx talks about communism being a stronger society, a more efficient society, how communism drives capitalism to extinction. And maybe, let me make another reference to a philosopher whom we're not talking about in this course. And the philosopher is Plato, right? And Plato is going to say that, so in Plato's Republic, Thrasymachus, that justice is the interest of the stronger. But aren't the philosopher kings, let's say philosopher kings and queens, aren't they the stronger ultimately? And isn't the Callipolis the strongest polis? That's an interesting way. So I'm talking about not morality, but self-interest, might makes right. And maybe we can make those phrases compatible with the utopian projects of Plato and utopian projects of Marx. How you can have a just society, a harmonious society, a consensual society, which is at the same time, because it is consensual, stronger, right? This is, John Stuart Mill in his On Liberty, this is basically his insight. This is what he says. He says that the last paragraph of John Stuart Mill's On Liberty is that a country which diminishes its people, a country which makes its people small, will find out that no great thing is possible with small men. That if the government nullifies, dumbs down the individuals, thereby weakens itself. That Hobbes would say that the strength of the sovereign lies in the vigor of the subjects. This is chapter 30 of Hobbes's Leviathan, right? And so so might makes right. There might be a way. There might be a way to read this in a consensual fashion. But of course, this is for Thucydides, this is not his project. For him, maybe there's a hope that something like this can be organized, but behind the scenes, between the lines. But Thucydides certainly doesn't talk about it this way. Like, I think that Thucydides is going to say that might makes right is an accurate description of human affairs. That as a matter of an accurate description, it is true what people consider right. Thrasymachus is going to say justice is simply the interest of the stronger. The stronger party in any society has the opportunity to impose its will, to indoctrinate individuals into submission, indoctrinate through force and fraud, through ideology, also through systematic misrepresentation of reality, to indoctrinate individuals into obedience. And so the word justice doesn't really mean anything. The ruling power calls just what is in their interest, right? And Thucydides, in general, I think is, again, he thinks that that's an accurate description of human affairs, but I do not think that Thucydides endorses this in a normative sense. I don't think he likes it. I don't think he says it's good. In some sense, I think that for him, it's a tragic fact about human life, and we have to work through this. The analogy I gave in class is like cancer. I don't mean to depress anyone at this wonderful hour, but as far as my biologist friends tell me, all of us will get cancer at some point if we live long enough. Hopefully, medicine of the future will find a way to overcome this predicament. But right now, in 2022, just a biological fact. If you live long enough, the way human cells work, after enough divisions, inevitably, or let's say overwhelmingly likely, you will get cancer. It doesn't mean it's good. It's just a fact of life. It doesn't mean it's good. And, in some sense, we have to be realistic about it and maybe take steps to prevent it. And I feel that Thucydides is going to say the same thing. It's an inevitable fact that might make right? And then, hopefully we can somehow work around this. Although, again, Thucydides makes no prescriptions. He doesn't say how you should avoid this. But I feel that it is implicit in his argument that maybe we should try to avoid it somehow. But how exactly is not clear. Although, again, future philosophers will try to imagine these. And this is why I refer to Marx and Plato. Plato, I think, is actually writing after Thucydides. As far as I remember, no, definitely. Plato is writing after Thucydides. So, next generation will try to think of some ideas to counter that. And Hobbes. So Plato, Marx, and Hobbes. Chapter 30, which is, for my money, the most important chapter of the Leviathan, which nobody ever reads. And these I would say are the, so to speak, the basic insights from Thucydides, and I suppose from here I want to proceed and maybe talk about the book in slightly more detail, and specifically maybe mention the important passages in the book that we need to pay attention to. Again, the book, which is referred to as the History of the Peloponnesian War, although, strictly speaking, of course, the book has no title, as far as I know. Anyway. Okay, so again, so this is going to be like I don't want to say summary. This is going to be highlights of the book, and the highlights of the book are the following. So we start with, I think we start with a funeral oration. Let me just double check my. Yeah. So I hope I'm not mixing up the chronology. It's not the easiest book to summarize. It's a pretty long book. So again, so we have the funeral oration. We begin with the funeral oration by Pericles. So this is at the beginning of the war, and this is something like the first funeral of the first soldiers who have died. And Pericles is trying to give an account as to why they have died and that they have not died in vain. So, in many ways, Thucydides, right? Pericles is responsible for the war. Is responsible for getting Athens into the war. So maybe he tries to justify his actions by trying to talk about this. Well, actually, I suppose before we begin with funeral oration, I suppose, like, the elephant in the room is, often people say that the most important idea of the book is that the truest cause of the war is the truest cause. And the truest cause is, again, maybe structural realism with a question mark, right? The idea being that the war began because of the rise of Athens and the fear that it engendered in Spartans. So Spartan fear of the rise of Athens. And Sparta would be the hegemon of the Greek states. Again, ask me if this in the seminar if you want, because this is like a story that can be told for a very, very, very long time. All sorts of details we can fill in, right? What does it mean to be a hegemon, right? So Sparta is not really any kind of ruler over Greece. In fact, Spartan society was very closed society, and it was not expansionistic. And in fact, I wonder if I should talk about this now or later. This might take quite a long time. Well, anyway, let's say Mickey Mouse, like a toy model of Sparta. But we have to be very careful, because it's not like we have good historical basis for asserting this. But the point is that it is a small, non-expansionistic, like small, closed society, based on constant fear of slaves, fear of slave revolts. And actually, I think that, again, we have to be careful with the Spartan mirage. Spartan mirage, again, that we cannot necessarily trust the sources that talk about Sparta. But keeping the Spartan mirage in mind, right, precautions of the Spartan mirage in mind, the idea is that Sparta is, again, this small, closed society, and it is afraid of the slave revolts, and uncharacteristically. So obviously, all ancient Greek city-states practice slavery. All ancient Greek city-states. No, as far as I know, all ancient world practice slavery. Maybe with some weird exceptions, right? But certainly the Greek city-states practice slavery. But in most places, I would imagine that the slave population was actually usually a minority, and the slaves were never, I don't want to say never, but they were usually not particularly harshly exploited. There were some exceptions, especially if you talk about mining, using slaves for mining. This was, mostly, something close to death penalty prison existence. But again, usually slaves lived in, well, at least compared to helots, at least compared to Spartan helots, in relative comfort, right? Obviously, they were forced to work, but their life was not completely horrible. But what happened in Sparta is that they had a disproportionate number of slaves. And the citizen body of Sparta was actually very small. So there were very few Spartan citizens, just a tiny minority, tiny proportion of the population. And then you had a huge slave population. And you also had a fairly sizable proportion of clearly more than there were Spartans, right? Or Spartiates, as they're called in the literature sometimes. More than the Spartan citizens, you had the so-called perioikoi, which were resident aliens. So you have a minority of Spartans who are surrounded by the majority of hostile, largely hostile, resident aliens, and definitely hostile slaves who were called helots. And so, and the way this arrangement works, again, being careful, because we're not sure, but at least according to the sources, the way this arrangement worked is that Spartans were constantly training for war, and in some sense, Spartans were constantly in a state of latent civil war against their resident population. And this is why Spartans could never afford to leave their home city for too long. Because as soon as Spartan army left, there was always danger of rebellion. And I've heard some historians compare this to the situation in the antebellum American South. The idea being that, the slave owners, in some sense, become the slaves of the slave-owning system. The slave owners become the slaves of the slave-holding system. Or maybe not slaves, but hostages. Slave owners become hostages of the slave-holding system, right? Basically the Spartans could never leave, could not develop philosophy, could not develop culture, could not develop commerce, right? This is a bleak view of Spartan society. And constantly had to prepare for war, constantly be in a state of civil war, and maybe even terrorize the population with, periodical displays of force, right? But at the same time, Spartan army did leave the city from time to time, and because Spartans spent all their time training, they were unrivaled among the Greek city-states in martial prowess. They also had a very complicated system of alliances, which was known as the Peloponnesian League, right? Which they have also made good use of in times of war. But the idea is that, ultimately, kind of what I'm driving at, is that Sparta was a hegemon, but it doesn't, so hegemon, it means it was like first among equals in some sense. It was the leader of the Greek states. It was not the sovereign of the Greek states. It was not the ruler of the Greek states. But it was the leader in the sense of being first among equals. And again, let's say, for example, when Persians attacked, which is again a whole other story which I don't want to go into right now. When the Persians attacked, the Greeks, by and large, ran to Sparta for help. This is what it meant to be a hegemon. And so it's not like the Spartans had the authority to command, but they had, a lot of influence, right? And most, kind of a lot of the times, like more often than not, they would be able to get what they want from other states, as long as their demands were reasonable, right? And this actually changed during the Persian Wars, because to everybody's complete surprise, when the Greeks held fast and stood together, and I'm kind of tempted to go on a tangent, I don't know, maybe I'll talk about this some other time, but hoplites and hoplite phalanx. Let me just, I don't know, mention this. Hoplite phalanx is a very interesting way of fighting. So it has like economic basis, and also has, you know, military and political implications. So basically, do I want to talk about this right now? Maybe, okay, I don't know. Maybe let me talk about this for at least for 5 seconds. So again, this is not necessarily very well known, because again, there were no cameras back then. So this is a historical reconstruction, but I think it's a pretty good historical reconstruction. So the idea is that, first of all, like, you know, so who are hoplites? Hoplites are heavy infantry. We're talking about heavy infantry. So when I say heavy infantry, I mean heavily armored infantry. So these are soldiers, individual soldiers, who are dressed in heavy armor, right? Especially with huge round shields. And the huge shield is actually called hoplon, a hoplon. This is why they're called hoplites. This is just coming from the name of a shield, right? And very long spears. So you have heavy armor, huge heavy shield, and a very long spear. And you fight in close formation, shoulder to shoulder. And this close formation is known as the phalanx. Now, immediately, in order to afford all this gear, you had to be a relatively wealthy farmer. So when you talk about hoplite regimes, these are usually oligarchies, because the kind of all the population, only a small proportion can afford to be hoplites and to fight in a phalanx. Aristotle very famously talks about how if the main fighting force of your army is cavalry, then you're going to be an aristocracy, because horses are super expensive in ancient Greece. And this is going to be like a tiny elite. If you're fighting with hoplites, which is heavy infantry, then you're going to be an oligarchy. And then the idea is that, in some sense, and again, you can see this is a structural explanation. This is science of human affairs. Athens is democratic because it's the basis of Athenian power is not cavalry, and it's not heavy infantry. But, you know, think about it yourself. Take a second to think. What is the basis of Athenian power? It's the fleet. It's the triremes. It's the fleet. And the rowers on the ships can be poor as dirt. And this is so basically the navy. The rowers on the ships can be poor as dirt. Anybody can row the ships. And this is going to be, therefore, the basis of democracy. So basically, this is why it's like, in some sense, I go back to the previous slide. Might makes right. Might makes right. What is the, or think of Hobbes, mutual relation between protection and obedience. The people who protect you then, in return, demand obedience. If you are protected by cavalry, then you're going to live in an aristocracy. If you are protected, if the bulk of your fighting force is hoplites, then you're going to have a hoplite oligarchy. But if you are fighting with ships, then you're going to have these huge swaths of people who man the oars, and they will demand political participation. They will demand political rights. And this is going to be the basis of a democracy. Again, this picture is due to Aristotle. Not this, and Aristotle is writing much later than Thucydides. Aristotle. So Sparta is a small, closed society which is afraid of slaves, and Sparta is a hoplite oligarchy. Is a hoplite. Although Spartan constitution, should I talk about this? Probably not. But Spartan constitution is actually very complicated. It's incredibly complicated because Spartans have a mixed regime. They have a mixed regime. It's a mixture so mixed regime. They have 2 kings, an aristocratic council, and an oligarchic assembly. And I say oligarchic but of course, all citizens could attend the oligarchic assembly. It's just that the only people who were citizens were hoplites. Like your title to citizenship was your ability to fight, to afford the heavy weaponry, right, required for the for fighting as a hoplite. Okay, so we have the Spartan mirage, which we should not, because again, like everything I say about Sparta should be taken with a tablespoon of salt, because who knows? Again, no cameras back then. Yeah, so Athens, as opposed to Sparta, was this open commercial society. So it's open, it's commercial, it's Sparta is land-based, Athens is maritime, so its power is based in its command of the seas, and as opposed to Sparta, which is very deeply militaristic, so it's militaristic. Athens is based on it's democratic. It's democratic, and very importantly, you have this debate, and the power of rhetoric. Dialogue, debate, diplomacy, and rhetoric. These are the watchwords of sorry, my brain has frozen there for a second. These are the watchwords of Athens as a culture. Again, with a grain of salt, but something like this. When we talk about Athenian democracy, people will immediately say that, of course, Athenian democracy was excluding non-natives. So there was a sizable proportion of resident aliens who were denied rights of citizenship, and of course, women were denied rights of citizenship. Also, it's important that constitutions changed, and Spartan constitution was actually relatively stable. Athenian constitution actually changed quite a bit, so it was sometimes more democratic, sometimes less democratic, sometimes more exclusionary. I should also mention that Sparta, like again, we talk about Spartan mirage, and I said some things which probably sound quite bad to a lot of my listeners, that Sparta is totalitarian and closed, but a lot of ancient philosophers actually completely idealized Sparta. I would imagine that Plato was a huge fan of Sparta, that he esteemed Sparta over and above, let's say, Athens. And also, let's say, Rousseau thinks of Sparta as one of the greatest societies of all time. Although I do think that we sort of have to be careful, because of maybe both Plato and Rousseau are idealizing Sparta. So they are talking about Sparta as an ideal, but not real Sparta being ideal, but the sort of imaginary Sparta in their heads, which might be quite different. Okay. So I wanted to, yes, I was talking about the truest cause. So basically, why does Thucydides talk about the truest cause, and what is the importance and the relevance of talking about it, in a larger philosophical context? The relevance is quite simple, right? Because there were immediate causes, like especially the stasis in Corcyra. The city of Corcyra was it was an offshoot. It was a colony of Corinth, and it had a dispute with Corinth. And basically, this came down to the issue of naval supremacy, because Corcyrans had a fleet, and if the city of Corcyra joined the Peloponnesian League, so if city of Corcyra joined Spartans, this would threaten Athenian supremacy. But conversely, if Corcyra, which was, I think, neutral at the time, as far as I remember, if Corcyra joined Athens, this would make Athens much too strong. So you understand, right? So like a bargaining chip up in the air. And I think you had two factions. So basically there was, the civil war was beginning in Corcyra. And one faction asked Spartans for help, and another faction asked Athenians for help, right? And nobody could win in this situation because, again, like Corcyra remaining neutral was the stable thing. But if it joined one or the other, this might prompt an immediate response, right? Nobody wanted the other side to gain Corcyra as its ally. This was one of the immediate causes. Another immediate cause of the war was the so-called Megarian decree. I don't even want to go into details because it's a funny story, kind of all sorts of interesting anecdotes, but doesn't really. So basically, Thucydides comes in and he says, these are not the real causes. These are not the real causes. The grievances of the Megarians, or let's say the this issue with Corcyra, it's much less, like the immediate facts on the ground are much less important. What is more important is this overarching picture. And the overarching picture is that for, I think, well, at least for a century, maybe probably more, the ancient Greeks had a certain kind of, stable international, I want to say, if that's an appropriate word, arrangement with Sparta as the hegemon. And ancient Greek city-states, the polis, went to war with each other constantly. But these wars were small and limited, usually. And, I would imagine, historians tell me that fewer than 15% of the army usually died in these wars. So, I mean, they were violent, but they weren't exactly like all-out wars to destroy each other. Two armies get together, they fight. Fewer than 15% of the army dies. Then one side wins, and then they negotiate. So these wars were relatively short and relatively peaceful. Not particularly disruptive. And there were rules of engagement, customary rules of war, which were by and large followed. And then, again, the Persians invade against all odds, unimaginably, right? The underdog, the Hellas, the Hellenes, right? The Greeks unite together and amazingly, not decide, but manage to beat the Persians. And in the process of doing so, right? In the process of beating the Persians, this victory destabilizes the relationships between the Greek city-states. Most importantly, what happens is that Spartans, again, are closed society, they're land-based society, and they do not want to expand. They do not want to move out. Athenians are sea-based, they're maritime-based. And so, as the Persians are defeated, there's now a possibility on the offensive, and the Athenians take this possibility. The Spartans cannot really, expand and plunder the Persian towns. But Athenians can. So Athenians take their navy and they go across the sea, across the Aegean Sea, assaulting the northern coast of Egypt and the western coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, right? Sometimes, have expeditions inland, and this creates more power and more wealth to the Athenians. And in fact, Athenians use this situation to create their empire. And their empire, the Greek word would be arche, actually is not an empire, but formally is a league called the Delian League. So you have these two very different entities. The Peloponnesian League, which is this defensive alliance with Sparta as the hegemon at their head, but Sparta not being particularly expansionistic, and the Spartans do not really control their league, the Peloponnesian League, in the same way that the Athenians control their league, which is the Delian League, right? And the Delian League begins as a defensive alliance, and the states are happy to join the league because they're afraid that the Persians might come back. So the city-states of the Aegean are so happy to be accepted under the protection of Athens, but you understand, in return for protections, you have to contribute, right? And you contribute either money or ships. And of course, very few states are capable of contributing ships. But if you contribute money, what does Athens do? Athens uses this money to buy more ships and therefore become even stronger. And thereby in a position at a later time to demand more money from you as a tributary state. And very often, a state offers, let's say, ships and men, but there's some dispute, and the Athenians come in and lay siege to the city and take away their ships, And a city used to pay tribute in ships, but now they pay tribute in money, right? So they used to be like a junior partner in the Delian League, and now they become a tributary, right? They used to be sort of a junior ally, and now they become a subject city-state. And so gradually this Delian League, this defensive alliance with Athens at its head, gets transformed into really what's effectively an empire. And the Athenians are taking tributes, payment in cash in exchange for, well, not really in exchange for protection anymore, but just because they can. And the treasury of the Delian League is moved to Acropolis, to Athens. So in a very important sense, you're just paying tribute to Athens. And Pericles, I think, calls Athenian Empire for what it is, an arche. And I think Cleon, in the Mytelenian debate, Cleon will actually say to the Athenians, come on, don't fool yourself. What we have here is not a league, it is a tyranny. Cleon, an Athenian statesman, in the Mytelenian debate, will say to the Athenians, what you rule over is a tyranny over unwilling subjects. And you have to understand, Cleon says to the Athenians, that our strength, our power, our empire is based on force, based on coercion. We have to look facts in the eye and understand that our security, the security of our city-state, is dependent upon us being able to project force and to keep subject states in check, right? Very bold assertion, right? But quite possibly very accurate, right? So this is the truest cause. Now, against this whole background, let me continue, right? So the truest cause, again, is the Spartan fear of the rise of Athens. And I basically told you the story, right? How Athens expands, and first because they are really afraid of the Persians, and later only under the pretext of protecting Greeks against the Persians, but really just expanding their empire and taking tribute in money, in gold or something like that. So in the funeral oration by Pericles, where actually, as far as I remember, Pericles talks about how their league is really an arche, is an empire. But Pericles has a certain kind of justification. And his justification is this ideal of democracy, of equality, so the Greek words would be isonomia and isogoria, which is equality before the law, and isogoria, which is equality of speech, that any member, any citizen can stand up in the Athenian assembly and speak their mind. Anybody. Again, this is a huge difference between Athenian direct democracy and what we call democracy today. Many classical political philosophers, like let's say Machiavelli or Rousseau or Hobbes, would not call most of the regimes today, let's say United States of America, would not call them democratic. Democracy is when any citizen can speak in the assembly, and the decision of all the citizens, like a referendum, is the final judgment on all the matters, right? And that's not the case in democracies today. You have elective, representative democracies, and elections for the ancients, Aristotle would talk about this, elections are oligarchic. Elections always favor the rich and the powerful. So elections are oligarchic. Democracy for the ancients is only direct democracy. And direct democracy is plebiscite, so voting. And very importantly, much more importantly, lottery. Appointing offices by lot, that every citizen, regardless of birth or wealth, any citizen has an equal chance in a fair lottery to become a statesman for a certain limited period of time. The only, well, I don't want to say the only, but of the significant, historically significant positions, the biggest exception to lottery was generals. So Athenians elected 10 elected generals. And it's 10 people, and these 10 generals were accountable to the council, to the assembly of all the citizens. Assembly, as Hobbes would say, democracy is where the sovereign is the assembly into which every citizen has the right to enter. Assembly into which every citizen has the right to enter, right? And so this is exactly, I mean, Pericles had to report back something like 4 times a year. So even though he was elected for a year, and then next year he had to be re-elected, 4 times a year he had to report back to the assembly, and the assembly could vote him out of office at any point in time. When Marx talks about, the system of councils, and he certainly has something like the Athenian system with much more accountability and transparency. Clearly, I mean, say what you want about Athenian democracy, but it clearly has more accountability and transparency than most countries I know of in the world today. At least if we can believe the historians. Anyway, So yes, so isonomia, isogoria, yes. And so this is potentially something, by Pericles, when Pericles talks about this is potentially something like ideology, right? This idea that Athens, he says Athens is the school of Greece. Athens is the school of Greece. Like the cultural leader of Greece, school of Greece. And maybe Athens has a mission to spread democracy. Mission to spread democracy, because democracy is the right way to govern, is the just way to govern. And you can see a big discrepancy between Sparta and Athens, because Spartans don't seem to show much interest in promoting their way of life. In fact, Spartans have the strong feeling of exceptionalism. Again, if we are willing to believe these idealized pictures, right, the notion is that Spartans have to train constantly to maintain this individual martial excellence, individual martial prowess. It's a society which is constantly preparing for war. And in some sense, Spartans are the best. And I think that if you asked a Spartan, do they want other cities to become like Sparta, he would laugh in your face and say, we are the best, we are the only ones. Nobody can be like us. So you see, Spartans, in some sense, don't want and cannot and don't want to export their way of life, because they are unique, and that's in some sense their pride. We are uniquely Spartan. None of you can be like us. Whereas Athenians have this potentially, this is one way. I think some of the theorists of international relations. I'm thinking of Kenneth Walls, maybe. I'm sorry, I forget. You, my dear students of international relations, will know who I'm talking about. What I meant is, again, this idea of spreading. Well, I think it's John Mearsheimer. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer is going to talk about how this democracy, this idea of regime change, spreading democracy around, that this is an inherently unstable idea. That this is a very dangerous and explosive idea. And Mearsheimer, I think, would say that this is one of the lessons of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. That we should, the democratic kind of democratic ideology is inherently destabilizing, which is again inherently destabilizing. I forget which scholar I wanted to refer to, but 100% certainly John Mearsheimer is very famous for this kind of position, right? Mearsheimer is a contemporary realist and a huge critic of American foreign policy. Mearsheimer. I hope this is the way you spell his last name. Yeah. And Mearsheimer is a realist, and again, based partly on his reading of Thucydides, he talks about how America should stop, trying to spread democracy, because this is destabilizing of the situation, right? So this is basically the outline of the takeaway points from the funeral oration. But also, let me immediately say that you can see how you have this sort of realist insight that morality is just a mask for self-interest. Or at least, this is a question which Thucydides raises for us. In what sense? Again, think about this. Athenians have an arche, have their empire, and they say that they have a mission to spread this empire among the Greek city-states. Is that true? Is this the kind of the real moral imperative, or are Athenians simply using this talk, empty talk of democracy, as a shameless pretext for expanding their empire? So this is actually maybe one of the biggest takeaway points from Thucydides' entire story. This notion of ideology. Again, as a systematic, nefarious misrepresentation of reality. We're going to get back to this, I hope, at some point. Okay. So this is the funeral oration. Let me continue. The next. So I'm trying to go chronologically. I hope I'm not mistaking anything. So this was A, B. So this is going to be our C. So next section that we are interested in is the Mytilenean debate. Mytilenean debate. And so it's Mytilenean because we have the city of Mytilene, which is on the island of Lesbos. A very important island and a very important source of Athenian naval power. And Paul Kelly in your home assignment talks about how the Mytileneans also have their own ambitions to become sort of the rulers of the island of Lesbos. They want to gain ascendancy on the island of Lesbos. So Mytileneans have Mytilenean expansive ambitions. But Mytileneans, again, are members of the Delian League. So they are a subordinate ally. I hope that's how, I hope I'm not making any spelling mistakes. Anyway, and in addition to this, Mytilene, well, I don't remember who's in power, but there's definitely two factions, oligarchic and popular factions, and democratic faction, and they fight in Mytilene within the city. So it's already somewhat complicated. And so what happens? Mytilene actually wants to defect to Sparta. So this is already during the war. So Sparta and Athens are already at war, and so Mytileneans decide to defect to Sparta. And what happens is Spartans promise to send help, talk about glory seeking, talk about fear, talk about reliability, but also talk about chance. The Spartans promise to send help to the Mytilenean rebellion. Do they send help? No. Is this because this is shameless exploitation on the part of the Spartans? They promised help, but the help did not come? Or did the Spartans really want to send help, but chance, fortuna, prevented them? We don't know. We do not know. But it's an important question to consider, right? Spartans failed to help. On purpose or due to unforeseen circumstances. And so what happens again in the Mytilenean debate is it's eventually because you have two speakers in the assembly. Well, no. Of course, first of all, the Athenians send their force, and there's treason. Somebody from within the city open the gates. So there's basically kind of the treason is betrayed, right? The plot is betrayed. So Mytilene is betrayed from within. So I hope you can see how I need to look up how you spell Mytilene, because it's going to drive me mad. Okay, so this is officially how you spell Mytilene. So when you talk about national affairs and international affairs, so domestic politics and international politics, right? We have to be aware of these issues. Again, Mytilene is not a single organism, right? There are different factions in Mytilene fighting for control, right? And this problem of treason is always a problem, right? Anyway, and so Athenians then go to the assembly and decide what to do with the defeated Mytileneans, right? And Athenians, so Cleon, who is this is actually after the death of Pericles. It's interesting because somehow did I forget about the plague? Yeah, I should have talked about the plague before. Okay, it doesn't matter. So this would be D. I'll talk about plague next. Okay, because very clearly Pericles is dead by this time, and so instead of Pericles, you have a whole bunch of new politicians in Athens, and some of these politicians are quite unscrupulous. So this person, Cleon, is a member of the popular faction. So he's a much more radical politician than Pericles was, and he's a more radically populist politician than Pericles. Pericles was kind of moderate, and Cleon is much more aggressive and adventurous and much more of a demagogue. So Pericles often has to convince Athenians against their will, and Cleon, it seems, plays much more into the passions of the moment of the crowd. So you understand, like Pericles is a moderator, and Cleon is a crowd pleaser. So maybe I should write this here. So Pericles is moderate, and Cleon, actually, let me spell it like this, is a crowd pleaser and a demagogue. Well, at least according to Thucydides, because obviously we haven't been there to see this, to witness this. All of these characters have to be, taken with a tablespoon of salt. So anyway, so Cleon appeals to the people and says, basically, again, we are an empire, we are a tyranny, and our rule is based on force, and we have to be tough. Basically, he says, kill all males and sell women and children to slavery. This is what Cleon says to the Athenians. And we're going to send a message to all other subject, city-states of the Athenian empire. If you rebel against us, horrible things will happen. Don't you dare rebel. If you rebel against us, horrible things will happen. Don't you dare rebel. And in fact, in a very interesting turn of phrase, Cleon appeals to justice. Cleon says, come on, what the Delians did was treason. They have violated sacred oaths. So Cleon says, send a message, so deterrence, so be tough. So first of all, kill everybody. Well, kill the males. Be tough, send a message to deter future rebellions. And Cleon also appeals to justice, because the way that the Delian League was made is that people actually swore religious oaths. So the city-states have sworn religious oaths. And so the Mytileneans, when they have decided to betray Athens, they didn't just violate human laws, they also violated divine laws, because they have sworn, right? They have sworn oaths, right? And so basically, Cleon, again, very interestingly, appeals to the idea of justice. Does he mean this, or is this justice simply as a mask for the interest of the stronger, right? Good question. Think about this. Justice, morality, who defines what's justice? Who defines what's morality? Cleon speaks of justice because this is really like objectively violation, transgression, and it is mandated by the gods. You have to punish Mytilene. This is your religious duty. Or is he just playing a certain kind of game? Is he just trying to sway the crowd by a certain kind of a rhetorical trick? So, opposed to Cleon, we have this person. So Cleon, we know quite a lot about. This other person, we have absolutely no information about them. So we only know their name. And their name is Diodotus. Or Diodotus. Diodotus. And Diodotus is also, so Cleon appears to be a realist, and Diodotus also appears to be a realist. So this is also a realist argument. Well, when I say realist, let's say broadly speaking realist. So this is not any kind of appeal to morality, realist. And Diodotus says, he starts by saying, you know what? Justice is a domestic affair. If somebody stole your cow, you take them to court, and you decide this matter in court. But in the international arena, says Diodotus, there's no such thing as justice. You and me, Athenian Assembly, we are not a court. We are a political body. And our task here is not to see that justice is done. Our only task is to protect Athenian interests. Is to protect Athenian interests. Only Athenian interests matter. So Diodotus says, I don't care who's right or wrong. I don't care what kind of promises you broke. The only question I'm interested in is what is in the interest of Athens. This is what Diodotus says. So interest is more important than justice. In fact, I think Diodotus implies that, come on, these rules are made up by human beings. They don't mean anything. Again, as Hobbes would say, covenants without the sword are but words. Covenants don't matter. So, okay, somebody made a promise, they violated the promise. Human beings will always break rules. That's in human nature. In fact, Diodotus says this. Very, very pessimistic, very bleak view of human nature. And Diodotus says, human beings have a propensity to violate laws, and it doesn't matter how harsh a punishment you want to impose. Diodotus says, many offenses carry death penalty. For many offenses, people know that if they get caught, they will die, and still people commit those offenses. So basically, Diodotus says that threat of punishment is imperfect. So threat of punishment is an imperfect deterrent. And so Diodotus basically says that, come on, Athenians, you will send this message that, oh, you take no prisoners, you kill everybody, but it doesn't matter. It will not prevent people from rebelling. Because because violating laws is in human nature. And of course, you can continue this story. You can imagine that some other city-state, when they rebel, they will think, well, we are farther away from Athens than Mytelene. We have Spartan help promised to us or something like that. So other states will always find some opportunity to rebel. So this will not be a very good deterrent. So Cleon's strategy will not work. However, says Diodotus, he says, remember why we won against Mytelene. Why have we won? Because some of the Mytileneans defected. They have committed treason. They have opened the gates for us. It was the Mytileneans themselves who opened the gates. So Diodotus says, let's be merciful. Let's show clemency. Not because it's just, not because it's moral or humane. Come on! Who cares about morality? Who cares about humanity? Might makes right. Do what's in your interest. If you offer if you offer mercy right now, then in the future, when another state will rebel and your armies will come to their doorstep, the people on the inside will be more motivated to defect, will be more motivated to betray their superiors. Because again, and this is also another very important insight of Thucydides, states are not individuals. States are not individuals. Let's say when the United States of America goes to war against Afghanistan, it's not like one single thing goes to war against another single thing. Because the US is not one thing. There are many different factions within the US. And Afghanistan is not a single thing. There are many different people who live in Afghanistan. Some of them support the regime, others don't, right? So Diodotus is very, very well aware of this. And so he says, but if, the implication is, if you threaten to kill all the population, then the fear of this retribution will actually galvanize the population. So if you follow what Cleon says, this will not actually help you in future rebellions. This will hinder, this will prevent, this will make it harder for you to put down rebellions. Because the fear of Athenian retribution will galvanize, will unite the population inside. Think about this. Fear is the pro-social emotion. Fear is the root of society. Fear makes peace. Fear makes order. Fear makes society. Fear is at the root of society. This is what Diodotus says. This is what Thucydides, I think, implies. This is what Machiavelli very clearly will say. And this is also what Hobbes will say. That the basis of society is fear. Fear of common enemy unites us. So Diodotus says, let's not fuel this fear that will unite our traitors against us. Let's encourage people to rebel. Encourage people to betray the rebellion, right? So the city rebels. Let's encourage citizens to betray the rebellion to us, to tip us off. Imagine, again, a future city like Mytelene rebels. But some people within the city think, well, if I send message to Athens that the rebellion is in progress, and if I send message to Athens that I'm actually a loyal ally of Athens, Athenians will come, they will put down the rebellion, and they will reward me. So we are encouraging treason. Again, think about morality. Is that a moral thing to do? To encourage treason? Is that a moral thing to do? When we talk about humanity, in some sense, the whole strategy of Diodotus is to say the end justifies the means. The end justifies the means. And so actually what happens in the debate in the assembly is that in the first day, Athenians vote to kill Mytileneans, and they send a ship with the orders to kill all Mytilenean males and to sell women and children to slavery. And then the next morning, they decide to hold an assembly for the second time. And the next morning, they repeat the debate. So the first day, Cleon wins. Think about this. Thucydides is going to say, democracy is fickle. Democracy is inconstant. They change their minds. The first day, they voted to kill Mytileneans. The next day, they regret their decision. They change their mind, and they send a second ship. And thankfully, because of the winds or whatever, fortuna, luck, chance. Due to luck, by luck, the second ship arrives in time to stop the execution. And the second ship, saves the Mytileneans. Now, think about the way I told the story, and think about the way people usually tell the story. Usually people tell the story, there's this evil Cleon who wants bad things to the Mytileneans, and then there's this humane, liberal Diodotus. Is that true? At the end of the day, we don't know. We haven't been there. We haven't heard their stories. There's no chance for us. These people are dead. You cannot talk to them and examine their arguments. But I think it's quite possible to see Cleon as this, religious terrorist who says, justice be done. Let the world perish, justice be done. And Diodotus, is this humanity? Yes, he offers Mytileneans mercy, but for purely selfish reasons. Let me also, I guess, immediately mention, and I actually was planning to mention this way before, that in an important sense, and Paul Kelly talks about this, that one of the opponents of Thucydides is going to be Kant. And I stand with Thucydides against Kant. This is one of the main tasks for me in my whole intellectual career. In all the courses I teach, I take on Kant. Now, I don't disagree with everything that Kant says. I think that Kant's epistemology is actually very useful. But I'm a big opponent of Kant's moral philosophy. I think Kant's moral philosophy is not only wrong, but also very dangerous. Tentative conclusion. Take with a grain of salt. You don't have to agree with me. But let me explain the reason as to why I think Kant is wrong, and let me explain the reason as to why Kant is wrong in light of the Mytilenean debate. Because Kant always assumes that, for example, when he talks about this categorical imperative, Kant assumes that all moral questions have an answer. All moral questions have an objective answer. And basically, again, I think if you think about the Mytilenean debate carefully enough, you can see, no. So Thucydides is going to say, no. Sometimes you have a genuine conflict of interest. It's one side against the other side. We think we are right, and the other side thinks that they are right. So you have legitimate, incompatible claims. Incompatible claims. Again, oversimplify the story. Imagine, people like to, write post-apocalyptic novels, watch post-apocalyptic movies. Imagine some kind of post-apocalyptic scenario. I don't know. There has been a nuclear war, and there are two survivors in the street, and they see something like a chocolate bar, let's say, and it's either I kill you, take the chocolate bar, and I live, or you kill me, take the chocolate bar, and you live, and I die. You know, it's a tragic story. Let's hope none of us will ever have to find ourselves in a situation like this. But somebody like Thucydides is going to say, what categorical imperative, Kant? There's no categorical imperative. It's kill or be killed. Again, imagine yourself lost in the woods somewhere, and a hungry bear attacks you. You kill the bear and live, or the bear kills you, eats you, and lives. It's, you know, you against me against you, enemy versus enemy, like genuine enemies. It's not like somebody's in the wrong. It's not like one side is evil and the other side is good. No, genuine conflict of interest. And I feel that Kant is completely blind to this. To this, genuine complexity of human affairs. Now, of course, I'm saying I'm using categorical language. Please take it with a grain of salt. Remember, I'm a skeptic first. Free and equal discussion. So, you know, if you think if any students manage to convince me out of my aversion to Kant, I'd be more than happy. You know, for der Zwang losen Zwang des besseren Arguments, peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. But I need to hear the arguments. Again, so far in the past 10 years, I feel that Kant has been constantly but he's a worthy opponent. I respect Kant deeply. I very much respect Kant. But I also respectfully think that he's wrong. And as Nietzsche says, we are defined by our enemies. We have to choose our enemies wisely. So I have chosen my enemy wisely, and this is Kant. So this is the plague, Mytelenian debate. Sorry. Yeah. So I also need to talk about the plague, and the Median dialogue, and the Sicilian expedition. And I think that I have 20 minutes left in class. I wonder if I'll be able to do all this. Well, let's continue, I guess, and we'll see how it goes. So, yeah, I think I can be very quick about the plague. So, plague, first of all, shows the, so Thucydides is an atheist. Also, Thucydides, because, you know, he doesn't think that there's a supernatural cause to the plague, not a supernatural cause. And also, Thucydides is an atheist in, well, again, take this word with a grain of salt, okay? Take this word with a grain of salt. Let me maybe write it in quotes. He's a quote-unquote atheist. There's an atheistic element identifiable in Thucydidean narrative, right? So he's also an atheist because he very clearly shows, I think, the biggest problem in theology, which is the problem of evil. And Thucydides has this wonderful phrase. He says that what happens during the plague is that people don't care about laws. He says, human laws, people believe that they will die before. So let me paste the quote maybe, and read the quote. Yeah. So no fear of God or law of man had a restraining influence. As for the gods, it seemed to be the same thing whether one worshipped them or not, when one saw good and the bad dying indiscriminately. Mm-hmm. This is the problem of evil. Children dying from cancer. This seems to be completely unnecessary evil, which is incompatible with a good God. Either gods don't exist, or they're not good if they allow children to die from cancer, right? This is the famous argument of the ancient skeptics like Sextus Empiricus, or of the ancient Epicureans. Actually, you know, I have a whole lecture on Epicurus who talks about that there. You know, gods either don't exist or don't care about us. This is effectively atheism, right? So this is no fear of God. And also he says, as for offenses against human law, no one expected to live long enough to be brought to trial and punished, says Thucydides. So this is the other element of his account of the plague. So this is anticipating Hobbes. So compared to Hobbes, society is built on top, so order on top of chaos, right? And when society collapses, when the order is suspended, we go back to war of all against all. War of all against all. Okay. Yeah, also, yes, so Pericles dies in the plague, who was a moderating influence. And Cleon, people like Cleon, like the crowd pleaser Cleon, take ascendance. Yeah, so very often people, when they talk about this, they will mention how waltz actually has written an article about the COVID riots in the United States of America. Should I add this? Let's add this here. So Walt's COVID riots in the U.S. I have no idea if it's true. I'm not an expert. I'm just mentioning that, you know, because this is often mentioned in the literature. So I think we're doing not too bad so far. I think I'm you know, almost at the end of my notes, of my lecture notes. So bear with me, people. Okay, this does not work. Why doesn't it work? Yeah, okay, good. So next we have Median dialogue, Melos, and finally we're going to have Sicily. Yeah. So obviously it would have been a slightly better idea to talk about Melos right after Mytelene, but it's okay. It's okay. You have good memories, so hopefully you still remember what was going on. Melos is a neutral city-state. Melos, I think, is a Spartan colony, but it's a neutral Spartan colony. So it's like, you know, sometime in the past, somewhere in the past, Melians were, you know, originally were, you know, offshoot of Sparta, like allied to Sparta, something like that. But not allied, but, you know, offshoot, because colonies were independent in ancient Greece. So they have cultural ties to Sparta, but are not in a formal alliance to Sparta. Cultural, but not formally allied to Sparta. And the idea is that, again, so they're not exactly neutral. So they're politically neutral, but culturally tied to Sparta. And Athenians, because of their position, come and basically say, join us or die. And again, there's this very, I encourage you to read. The Melian dialogue is not particularly long, and it's very interesting. So Athenians talk about how justice only holds among equals. So this is like only about mutual self-interest among equals. Mutual self-interest among equals. But between unequals, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. And very interestingly, Athenians say that gods are on their side. So actually, let me say at least one more word about this. Okay, I'm just looking through my notes. I find about the plague that the norms are fragile. Do you want to write this? Yes, maybe yes. So social norms are fragile and artificial. Maybe they are fragile because they're artificial. Okay, maybe I'll go back after I finish with all this and look at my notes in great detail. Maybe I mistook. Anyway, so basically again, sorry, go back to Melos. So basically, the strong can and will want to and should by gods, by the will of the gods, by the, you know, with the consent of the gods, by the will of the gods, dominate the weak. So again, the strong can dominate the weak. This is what the Athenians say. Again, I do not think that Thucydides agrees, but this is what the Athenians say, that the strong can dominate the weak, the strong will want to dominate the weak. And I feel that with A and B, Thucydides agrees. And also Athenians would say that it is right for the strong to dominate the weak. So maybe Thucydides agrees with A and B, but possibly not C. I hope it's clear. So Thucydides clearly agrees that the strong can dominate the weak and will want to dominate the weak, but he doesn't necessarily think that they should. Now, what's the alternative is not clear, but maybe that's at least, again, maybe Thucydides hopes that people will read his book in the future and will decide that maybe they shouldn't. And it's a very interesting issue that, you know, well, I have this note written here. I have the example of Gandhi. So Gandhi, Gandhi is widely considered to be this wonderful moral figure, like the pinnacle of human virtue. And you see, the realist tradition would say nobody's a saint. Nobody is a saint. And I do not think that Gandhi is a saint. I think Gandhi is a terribly controversial figure. Think about this. During the Second World War, Gandhi advocated nonviolence. So Gandhi advocated non-violence against Germany. Advocated non-violence against Germany during World War II, including for private individuals. And it's like, you know, I want to say at the very least that's a very controversial position. Like, I don't know, we could have a discussion or debate in class. But like in general, I feel that at the very least you have to admit that that's a controversial position. That's not necessarily a moral thing to do. Maybe that's a horribly sinful and stupid and evil whatever thing to do. Like to you know, like imagine, you know, the enemy comes to your door and you non-violently give it to them and just pray to God. You know, be non-violent and pray to God. Is that necessarily good advice? Does this make you a good person? Does the fact that you use the word God automatically make you a good person? Was Gandhi a good person? I'm not sure. Okay, let's ask this question. So I have this with respect to the Melians because, you know, in some sense, what Melians are doing can be seen as an act of martyrdom. Isn't it foolish of the Melians? Isn't it foolish and irresponsible of the Melians to resist the Athenians? The terms are very clear. The Melians are offered to join the league or basically die. And it's not clear what the Melians are hoping for. Because as far as I can understand, within the structure of the situation, it's complete fantasy that Spartans are going to come and save them. So, you know, the kind of this is why I have Gandhi here. Are Melians really moral? Are Melians and Melians actually talk about this. Melians say that gods are on their side. Or are they deluded, self-destructive fanatics, right? Deluded, you know, fanatics who destroy themselves. I want to use the word suicidal is maybe not the right word. Self-destructive. Well, I'm looking for a better word. Let me leave self-destructive. Like what they are doing is unsafe, okay, and reckless. It's reckless fanaticism. Stupid, reckless fanaticism, right? Now, of course, people could say that should Athenians have shown mercy? When again, also Melians were also betrayed from within. Somebody opened the gates, basically, during the siege. Should Athenians have shown mercy? That's a very good question. And some people think yes, because maybe then Athenians would have been spared themselves. Yes, think of the future. But you know, This is such an interesting question because really think of the future. What happened in the future? Sparta spares Athens. Not because of morality, but because Spartans are afraid, because of fear of Corinth and Thebes. So think about this. What kind of a lesson? Now, of course, Thucydides did not have a chance to finish his book, so this happens after, sort of after the end of the book. But think about kind of the general takeaway point. Yes, Athenians destroy the Melians, they kill old men, and they sell women and children to slavery, and then Spartans come, and still Spartans are merciful to Athenians. Why? Because it is in the interest of the Spartans. Balance of power, balance of power. Spartans are weak. They have won the war, but they're weak because the war has cost them dearly. In fact, this is, if anything, this is a Pyrrhic victory for the Spartans. It's a Pyrrhic victory. Nobody really wins in the Peloponnesian War. Everybody loses. It's the king of Macedon. It's Philip of Macedon who wins the Peloponnesian War, right? And so the Spartans at this time don't know nothing about Philip of Macedon, but the immediate threat is the rise of Corinth and Thebes, and the Spartans are right to fear Corinth and Thebes because there are wars that follow the Peloponnesian War, and in fact it's the Thebans, Epaminondas and Pelopidas, but especially Epaminondas, who is the, in an indirect fashion, the tutor to Philip of Macedon. There's an interesting connection there. It is the Thebans, under the generalship of Epaminondas, who at the Battle of Leuctra are the first to beat Spartan in a fair, hoplite phalanx battle, right? Amazing story. So, but again, like what is, you understand, right? Athenians, should they have been merciful because people would be merciful to them afterwards? They were not merciful, but the Spartans did show mercy to Athens because of structural reasons. And if structural reasons were different, I don't think it would matter. I don't think it would matter. If it was in the interest of the Spartans to destroy the Athenians, they would have done so, regardless of the pretext, right? Complicated story. Of course, take everything I say with a grain of salt, but there you have it. Okay, finally, we have not a lot of time, and I want to talk about Sicily. Now, I have to tell you, Sicily is such an amazingly complicated story. But I feel kind of the main takeaway point is that democracy is warlike. Democracy wants to go to war. It's like poor people want plunder. Poor people want plunder. Spoils of war. And poor people want to benefit, right? They kind of this is against the democratic peace thesis, right? No, Thucydides shows democracies as being more warlike because, again, it is the majority of the poor who stand to benefit from the spoils of war. Also, democracy is a bad decision maker because democracy is fickle. It is swayed by demagogues. It is swayed by demagogues and torn by faction. Torn by faction. Now, exactly what happens? Well, you have Nicias versus Alcibiades. So Nicias is the careful, cautious conservative, and Alcibiades is this absolutely rock star of a man. Alcibiades is such a colorful figure, he definitely deserves just a whole lecture to himself. So I will not be able to do justice to the story of Alcibiades, but at least in broad outline. So what happens? So again, first of all, it's impossible to know for sure, and you have to understand, like, we cannot trust ancient historiography. So many stories about Alcibiades look like anecdotes, look like they have been constructed, invented. They look far too colorful. They look like fiction. So, separating fact from fiction when we talk about Alcibiades is actually very difficult. But the idea is that Nicias is this old general who has fought for peace. So Nicias is the party of peace. And so he's old, conservative, and he's for peace. And the Sicilian expedition happens at the moment of truce. There's ceasefire between Athens and Sparta, right? They're not at war. There has been a peace signed, which I think is 30 years peace. And Alcibiades is he has only become a general. He's and he's extremely rash, and he wants to go to war because he wants glory. Because he wants to win glory to himself, right? And so what happens is that very clearly, again, this is the danger. The danger, the democracy swayed by an opportunistic demagogue. Opportunistic demagogue. And so the idea is that the interests of Alcibiades is not the interest of Athenians. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to talk about this, in such short time I have left. But think about this. So what happens? Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very interesting situation, right? So Alcibiades says, let's go. So it's truce. There's no war currently. And Alcibiades says, let's go invade Sicily. Let's be expansionistic. Expansion. Why? It's a risky strategy. If Sicilian expedition succeeds, then Alcibiades wins glory for himself. But if it fails, it's the Athenians who pay the price. So he's gambling with somebody else's money. And again, think about this in structural terms. It's like, if you want, there's a selective pressure. Democracy, in some sense, creates selective pressure. The assembly of the people like to listen to rhetoricians. And there's this deep problematic political issue that people in the street cannot necessarily tell an expert from a rhetorician. Are you convinced because you're convinced by the strength of the argument, or are you convinced rhetorically? So the demos convinced by a good argument or a sweet lie. And the idea is that a sweet lie it's much easier. It's much easier. So the demos, right? It's much easier to spin a sweet lie than to have an argument. It's much easier to be a skilled rhetorician than to be, the philosopher king or philosopher queen, as Plato would say. And this is kind of the inherent danger. And again, so Alcibiades is gambling. So the demagogue is gambling with money which is not their own. With money which is not his own, right? With other people's fortune. And also, there's kind of an interesting wrinkle to the story due to kind of faction. So what happens is that, go back a step. So Alcibiades says, let's go conquer Sicily. And Nicias speaks, and he's an old general. And by the way, both Alcibiades and Nicias are featured in Plato's dialogues. They were kind of interlocutors, friends of Socrates, if you want. Very colorful characters, all sorts of things I want to say. By the way, yes, Alcibiades was a known friend and actually a student of Socrates, and also possibly a lover of Socrates. Alcibiades, in Plato's Symposium, talks about how he tried to seduce Socrates. And Alcibiades, like, was the first person in Athens. Like, everybody wanted to have sex with Alcibiades. Possibly, with a possible exception of Socrates, because Socrates just doesn't care about sex. He has sex, he has children, he has many children, he has a wife, but he just doesn't care very much for it. He's not ruled by unruly desires. So even though Alcibiades tries to seduce him, Socrates just does his thing, and he's not interested in, he's too much in control of himself. It's very interesting. Again, Socrates is not a vision of a Christian saint who has to restrain himself. No, he just is naturally calm and in control. He doesn't have to fight internally against his desire to have sex with Alcibiades. He just naturally impervious to Alcibiades' advances. But because Alcibiades is a known associate of Socrates, because of what we will hear about Alcibiades in a moment, because Alcibiades will get into a lot of trouble. This is one of the possibilities as to why Socrates was actually executed by the Athenians. Because he had students like Alcibiades, basically. Okay, let me continue the story. So Alcibiades says, let's go to Sicily. Nicias says, no, it's too risky. And in fact, if you want to conquer Sicily, you will need something like 200 ships. And Alcibiades, he just plays into the hands of Alcibiades. Alcibiades says, yes, exactly, that's an excellent idea. Give me 200 ships. And Alcibiades manages to persuade the Athenians to do this. And so, kind kind of Nicias tries to raise the stakes, but only plays into Alcibiades' hands. So Alcibiades is now gambling with Athenian fortune, and he's gambling with an increased Athenian fortune. Athenians send much more than they can really afford to send to Sicily. So again, democracy is fickle, democracy is passionate. People, think of the riches of Sicily. We're going to conquer Sicily. We're going to plunder. We're going to bring back all this treasure and all this glory from Sicily. Okay, and Thucydides obviously does not approve of any of this, right? Because he thinks it's rash, it's stupid. And if only Pericles was alive, Pericles would talk the Athenians out of this stupidity. And Alcibiades, according to Thucydides, is just this opportunistic demagogue who, again, wants glory to himself and doesn't care about Athenians. Now, as he's leaving, there's this kind of desecration of statues. No idea why. It's a complicated question as to exactly why. And one possibility is that this is actually a factional plot against Alcibiades, because there are factions in Athens. And Alcibiades wants to stand trial and says, let's have a trial right now because I want to acquit myself before I leave. And because of factional politics, think about faction. Because of factional politics, the trial, they say, no, go fight in Sicily, then you'll come back, then you'll stand trial. And as soon as he leaves, then he's put on trial. And then he's recalled. And so Alcibiades is recalled, and he's one of the leading generals of the Sicilian expedition. And Alcibiades, instead of going to Athens, of course, defects to Sparta. And this is incidentally one of the reasons why the Athenians lose, because they are now without their most brilliant general who started the Sicilian expedition. So Alcibiades defects to Sparta. Athenians, of course, without Alcibiades, lose the Sicilian expedition. It's a good question. I think it was in the cards. I think there was a possibility that if, at least we should entertain this possibility, that if Alcibiades was allowed, you see, democracy is fickle, and democracy is tied, is ruled by faction, is torn apart by faction. Alcibiades, it's like one day you vote to give him too much, and the next day you recall him. Just if only. So democracy isn't just fickle and inconstant; it's also torn apart by factions. It's like an add insult to injury. And so Alcibiades defects to Sparta. Then, according to the colorful story, and by the way, so helps Spartans tremendously against Athens. Tells Spartans of all the weak spots in Athens. Also think about this in terms of nation states. Alcibiades is an aristocrat, and he's welcomed by Spartan aristocrats. So his defection is made much easier because, again, ancient Greek city-states are not homogeneous. There was a party in Athens which was basically allied to Sparta during the war. There were Athenian oligarchs who wanted Athenian democracy to lose, wanted Spartans to win, because Athenian oligarchs defeated Spartan democracy with them in control. Amazing, right? Again, domestic politics, international politics. What's the phrase used? I think fifth column or something like that. So he defects to Spartans. He helps Spartans a lot, and then something happens. Well, according to the colorful story, he has sex with the king's wife and impregnates the king's wife. The child is born, looks too much like Alcibiades, and so Alcibiades has to run. He runs to Persia, and he plays off Persians against now both Athenians and Spartans, and he encourages Persians to maintain the strategy of divide and conquer, to remain neutral, help Sparta a little bit, help Athens a little bit, remain neutral, and just weaken the Greeks by enabling the Greek infighting. And so ultimately what happens is that he takes a huge fleet of Persians and actually brings the Persian ships back to Athens. And there's a terrible, very complicated political arrangements because there's an oligarchic coup in Athens. The oligarchic coup is reversed by a democracy. Alcibiades is acquitted actually in Athens, so he comes back to Athens as a triumphant hero. So when he defected to Spartans, he was sentenced to death, but now, because he comes back with a fleet, he's welcomed as a hero. This is his moment of glory. And then he, the war continues. The Peloponnesian War is going on. Then, at a particular point in time, he loses a particular, it's a complicated story, which I don't want to go into details. He loses a battle What happens is that because of this one defeat, even though he's a super skilled, super talented general, Athenians who are fickle and factions who are plotting against him, he's exiled, or something happens to him. I mean, like he's put on trial and he's forced into exile, right? And so now Athenians lose Alcibiades for the second time, and again, there's a possibility that Athenians could have still won. This is far beyond the Sicilian expedition, ended in a disaster, but this was not the loss for Athens. Athens could have still made a comeback after all those years. But now, for the second time, they exile Alcibiades, and then ultimately they lose, I think, at the Battle of Aegispotami, if I recall correctly. And Alcibiades, I have to tell you the end of the story. The end of the story is, you can imagine that after all this colorful career, Alcibiades had 1 million enemies, and so according to the traditional story, somebody, not sure who, but somebody sent assassins to his castles. He was in his castle in Thrace. He was a colorful figure, you can imagine. He went into exile to his personal castle. And his castle, well, castle may be the wrong word, estate. His estate was set on fire, and as he ran out naked with a dagger in his hand, ready to defend himself, he was killed by a shower of arrows. It's like, complete life of a rock star. Live like a rock star, die like a rock star. It's really quite an amazing, very, very colorful idea. But at the same time, it shows you, right, the dangers of democracy, dangers which are inherent in democracy, right? Okay, so, I think we're out of time. I have a whole bunch of things I want to say in conclusion, but I'm just gonna give one conclusion. One conclusion is gonna be like this. Well, yeah, okay. So this ideology, maybe we'll talk about this some other time. But the basic conclusion of Thucydides is that, please, we have to see complexity where people see simplicity. Okay? Like, I've told you a million different things today. It's a very complicated story, hard to follow in many ways. But the takeaway point from this is that human affairs are complex and never simple, right? And I suppose maybe another thing is that, we should call into question, like, what is good? What is justice? And isn't it the case that justice is always merely a mask for the interest of the stronger? That's the question. That's the question with which Thucydides leaves us. Okay, so we ran out of time 10 minutes ago, so I should be stopping here. I'm just looking at my notes to see if maybe there's something catastrophic which I forgot to talk about. Well, yeah, I think it seems all right. Well, anyway, it's super late. I think I'll nevertheless, drop by Teams at least for a moment in case people have some super duper urgent questions. Otherwise, colleagues, I hope this was fun. This was my first lecture ever in my life, full-length lecture about Thucydides. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we've learned something. I hope to see you in class in a couple days. Otherwise, thank you very much for your company. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Till next time, stay safe and take care.